warm greetings to all our guests from around the world. I'm David Mell. I'm the chairman of the British Friends of Aviv University, and I've been the chairman for the last 6 months. I'm delighted to welcome you to the TAU's 7th university for the day, and the first day is virtual and at home. Different experience for all of us, I'm sure. And it's great to have so many people here. We think we've got more than 350 people. Hope you will continue to join us online as we think of new ways to engage during these difficult times while the world waits for a return to a normal. Hopefully, particularly in the UK and in Israel, we're leading the world with the vaccines rollout, which is fantastic. And hopefully the rest of the world will follow soon. Please check your emails for messages from the Trust on upcoming events and news on what's happening to TAU. And while we recognize that times are so hard, any support you can provide to our fantastic university to help students in need or to support important research and ongoing programs, we'll be so grateful. Today, we have the special opportunity to hear from 4 of TAU's leading faculty members, who will each present to you shortly. But before they do that, I'm honored to introduce today's MC, Professor Eli Tamor. Eli is a professor at London Business School and founder of its Private Equity Institute. Eli has also taught at UCLA and the Wharton School. He is a governor of Tel Aviv University on the advisory board of the African Venture Capital Association, a committee member for the Nobel Prize in Economics, as well as an author and a serial cornerstone investor in multiple exits. Eli has been leading this event for us for many years, and we are thrilled that he agreed to do it again this year, not on stage, but on Zoom. Eli, thank you for your time and joining us once more. Before the speakers are introduced, you're about to see a short film, and then Eli will take over and the program will begin. I hope you enjoy the presentations and look forward to seeing you all next year, but hopefully in person. Thank you very much.
When COVID-19 broke in Israel, many students lost their jobs that helped them pay for their studies. We still feel its huge impact. Many students are struggling financially, and others face mental health challenges. They are at risk of dropping out of university. Some of them already have. Both the university and its student union have redirected funds to emergency scholarships. But this is not enough. TAU students still need your help to stay enrolled, follow their academic dreams, and become change makers in Israel and the world. Thank you for helping support our students in this time of need.
I guess my turn now. Can you hear me well? All good? Thank you. It's really, it is a pleasure to be here. I wish it was in London in our normal setup in one of the glorious venues, whether this is the Rothschilds or Infect, that has been both extremely generous to Tel Aviv University Trust and hosting us. The whole event, as many of you probably know and remember, was amazing. It was a social aspect, it was the drinks, and of course the academic content and context. And again, we are waiting for these days to come. So like everybody else in the world, we are in this sort of situation for now. The plus is that obviously they allow us to reach out to more people from the US and Canada and elsewhere. And the negative, on top of not being able to be physically connected and together, is the fact that we are within a whole situation, the challenge to have so many competing other webinars. There is a whole explosion of supply of webinars, and there is this myriad of competition. So that actually forces us to play to Tel Aviv University strengths, which is two slants. Number one is the academic slant. So we will speak about popular and relevant topics, to a large extent, but also with the academic side of it, of course. And the second is, unlike most of the other webinars that you are exposed to, this will definitely show, will engage in interdisciplinary aspects, which are where Tel Aviv University is so good at. So within that, we have 4 speakers today from the faculty of Tel Aviv. And the themes move around. We start from what everybody would expect us to be, which is the coronavirus. But hey, we are not going to do just corona. We'll have one aspect, first of all, indeed, on the core of the matter. We'll then have 2 more talks regarding other aspects. One is climate change, and the other one is historical perspective. And finally, we will have a talk about a totally different topic, but equally timely, and that's the evolution that has to do with machine vision. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Natalia Freund. She is from the Department of Clinical Microbiology and Immunology at the Sackler School of Medicine. I will not mention Tel Aviv University, this is obvious to all the participants. She got a postdoctoral studies at the Laboratory of Molecular Immunology at the Rockefeller University in New York. And Natalia received quite a few of prestigious awards. Earlier in her PhD studies, this is the CLOR Scholarship for Outstanding PhD Student of the CLOR Israel Foundation. Later on, the Breakthrough Prize of Tel Aviv University. I don't exactly know what it is, but the name Breakthrough Prize must mean a lot. And recently, the Merck Innovation First Prize. Natalia lectures at Tel Aviv University around immunology in the laboratory courses for the MD and PhD students, again, part of the Sackler School of Medicine. In addition to her esteemed publications, she's also an author or co-author of 4 granted and pending scientific patents. And you'll see they're all related to respiratory matters. One is HIV antibodies, then tuberculosis, and 2, guess what? Coronavirus antibodies and the prevention and detection of the coronavirus infection. So Natalia, please, over to you.
Thank you so much, Eli, for this kind and really nice introduction. And welcome, everybody. Can you hear me well? Please note.
Yep.
Yeah, great. Can you see my slides?
Yep.
Great. So thank you so much for inviting me, and welcome everybody for joining to this unique event to connect with our UK friends of Tel Aviv University. So I'm Natalia. I'm a faculty member at the Faculty of Medicine. I established my lab a little bit over 3 years ago after returning from New York with my family. And in the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to take time, so I won't go too long. I'm going to tell you what my lab has been doing in relation to COVID-19. Okay, so let's start. So this picture of little pretty ballerinas was taken in China a little bit, almost 2 decades ago, in 2002, during the first outbreak of the SARS coronavirus. SARS stands for Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome. And this picture looked very bizarre to people from the West world. I bet it looks completely normal to us now. But this is around this time when I started my academic path. I just finished my bachelor's degree in 2003, and then I was recruited to the army as an academic officer, and then I started my PhD, the theme of which was mapping neutralizing sites on SARS coronavirus spike protein, which again sounds really relevant now. But when I was working on that 10 years ago, nobody cared about SARS. And I remember one comment that one of my thesis examiners made was, well, I was defending my thesis, and he said, well, you know, it was really, really nice work, very impressive, but really who cares about a mild flu that happened in China and just disappeared as it came? And I remember I was really, really insulted when he made this comment. And you can see me here, I was doing a lot of experiments. I'm holding 2 experiments in my arms, and I'm cooking one inside me at the same time. So I was really very emotional about this comment. But I think that, you know, this kind of approach was not the right approach, because coronaviruses are pretty common. And if we look on this phylogenetic tree, we can see that here is the SARS-CoV-1 that emerged in 2002, and then in 2003 was another outbreak. And then 10 years later, we had the MERS epidemic, which was the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome. And then now, last year, we all heard about SARS-CoV-2, which is the coronavirus that caused COVID-19 pandemic. And now COVID-19 is pretty much everywhere. So there isn't a single place on Earth that wasn't affected by this pandemic. Over 100 million cases, 57 million recovered. The more sad number is 2.2 million people who died from COVID-19. And here you can see this map shows by every country the number of deaths per 1 million. And this is again a phylogenetic tree, but this time I'm not showing the whole world coronavirus genomes, but rather I can only fit on my slide the genomes of coronaviruses in one area. So the left side of the slide shows all the viruses that were isolated from Boston area, and the right side shows the Uganda area. And what you can see is that there are we can largely divide the viruses into strains of clades A and clade B, with clade B being the most prevalent. And here you can see also on the right side the clade B111 that was the ancestor of the British and South African variants that are 117 and 1351. So the take-home message is basically that we should have taken these viruses more seriously when they first emerged, because then we would have been probably more prepared for this present situation. Okay, so in my lab, we investigate antibodies, and antibodies are produced by immune cells that are called B cells. And I'm just going to give a very brief introduction about antibodies and B cells. So basically, in our body, we have a repertoire of naive cells. Here you can see them on the left side of the slide. And these cells are just circulating in our body, in our blood. And once we are getting infected or vaccinated, a certain amount of cells react to this vaccine or infection, and they go into unique anatomical structures that are called germinal centers. These are like universities for antibodies. And in these universities, the B cells, they mature, they get activated, and the best cell is selected, and this cell goes out of these germinal centers, and it turns out into 2 different types of cells. The first type of cells are the plasma cells that secrete antibodies to our blood. And the second type of cells are memory B cells. And the memory B cells are really the ones responsible for the long-term immunological memory that protects us from the same virus a second time if we're exposed. So in my lab, we've been applying this approach that we call a learning from the body approach. So what we do, we basically analyze infected individuals by collecting their blood sample after they're infected or vaccinated. And then we analyze these memory B cells. So we're really interested in the memory response that people develop following infection. And we use molecular immunology methods to reproduce their B cell response in the lab. And eventually we have these antibodies that are natural antibodies that were produced by the patient, but we can now really see what they bind, how they react, how they act, are they neutralizing, are they protective, and so on. And we have been using this approach, like Ellie mentioned, for HIV and tuberculosis and also SARS coronavirus. And I'm going to basically give you the highlights of our recent work that will be published on February 11th in PLOS Pathogens Journal. So when COVID-19 first hit Israel in March 2020, my lab was most interested in whether there is any difference in the antibody responses to the virus in people who are mildly sick versus those who have a severe COVID-19. So for that, we recruited a small cohort of 8 severe donors. These were really the first donors in Israel, the first COVID-19 positive cases in Israel, and another 10 donors that were mildly sick or completely asymptomatic following infection. And we asked, is there a difference in the antibody responses that these people have? And before I go into what we found, I would like to give a really brief introduction about how the virus infects the cells. So the virus, here you can see a schematic drawing of the SARS coronavirus. It has these spike proteins, and I bet you all heard about them, because these are the proteins that are the basis to all current vaccines. All the vaccines are based on the spike protein. And why is that? It's because the spike protein contains a part that is called RBD, receptor binding domain. And this is the key that the virus uses to enter, to open the door to the cell and start infection. So this is really the most important protein in terms of initiating the infection. And we asked, what is the antibody response that is formed against this spike? So first thing we found is that people who are more sick, severe donors, have more and better antibodies against the virus. And here you can see our data, the way it will appear in the paper. So severe are always in pink, mild are always in light blue, and these are the controls, the healthy donors. And you can see that we have a statistical difference between people who had a severe disease and those who were asymptomatic. And it's not only the quantity of the antibodies, it's also the quality of these antibodies, because here you can see how good these antibodies are in inhibiting the virus. So are these people protected? So all the severe donors, they will probably be protected from second infection. As to the mild, I'm not sure. They might get infected again. And it's not only the antibodies, but it's also the memory B cells. So severe donors have more memory B cells as opposed to the mild donors. Now we isolated antibodies from 2 severe donors. They are called COV-01 and COV-02. And we found several antibodies, some of which had really good activity. Here you can see this heat map here represents the amount of the antibody that is needed in order to neutralize the virus. So the lower this amount is, the better the antibodies are. And these are monoclonal antibodies. So single antibody isolated from a person. And we found 9 such antibodies, and all these antibodies bound really nicely to both RBD, which is the key, and the whole spike, which is the complete protein containing the key. Now, one antibody had really good activity. It's this orange one here. It's called Tau 2212, but it didn't bind any protein, RBD or spike. However, it did bind to spike expressed on cells. So this one is a really unique antibody. Now, based on functional assays, we were able to classify our antibodies into 3 different groups of antibodies. The first group were these 4 antibodies here that competed with ACE2. What it means that these antibodies can really block the tip of the key in the virus and prevent it from entering the lock and opening the door. The other antibody is here in purple, competes with another antibody, CR022, that does not bind in the key area, but binds outside the key, but still close enough. And another antibody, this orange antibody, binds a different site, conformational site. So we had 3 groups of antibodies. Now, what you see here is a microscopy images of cells infected with the live SARS coronavirus that can be seen in red. And you can see that the antibodies that I've just described, they go from marginal neutralizers to intermediate neutralizers to antibodies that completely block infection. So we can only see blue. Blue means live cells. Red means virus. We see no virus here. So these are extremely potent antibodies. So the next thing we tried is to use the different groups of antibodies that we had as a cocktail in combination. And I bet you heard about the Regeneron cocktail, the cocktail that President or ex-President Trump received when he got infected with coronavirus. And this is exactly what we did. So we combined antibodies binding different groups, different sites on the virus together. And what you can see here, this is summarized here in the heat map, is the virus only control. So red means, again, infection. And you can see that the virus only control infects the cells pretty quickly. This is over time, so for 3 days in culture. And here you can see every antibody alone and in combination with another 2 neutralizing antibodies. And you can appreciate that if we use the triple mix of 3 antibodies, this is the most right column in every box, you can appreciate that we can completely block infection. Now, what about the new variants? Can our antibodies act against the new emerging strains of coronavirus? So we solved the structure with our collaborators of several of our antibodies together with the spike protein. And here you can see one such structure. So this is the RBD, this is the key that goes into the cell. And here you can see this 501Y mutation. This mutation makes the key much better. It improves the virus and makes it more infectious. This is the British variant and the South African variant. Both of these viruses have this mutation. And you can see that this mutation goes in the interface with ACE2. However, luckily for us, this mutation is not in the interface with our antibodies. So our antibodies should still bind the new variants. This is what we think, and we are now testing it in the lab. The other 2 antibodies, 2 classes of antibodies that we have, they bind outside the key area, and they are still neutralizing. So we don't think that they will be affected by the strains. Okay, so I see that I'm already very close to my 15 minutes. So I'll conclude quickly. I showed you that COVID-19, a severe infection, correlates with better antibody responses. The responses are multiclonal. So every person who is sick with COVID-19 develops many different antibodies, not only one type. I showed you that combination therapy is beneficial, and this has been shown already. And we think that our antibodies will be also active against the new strains. So this is my last slide. I would like to really thank a lot of people who helped us on this journey. And I also want to thank the American friends and Canadian friends of Tel Aviv University. So the truth is that when we started this project, we didn't have any funds to fund it. And it took time until we applied to grants and we got the funding. But it is really the generosity of people like you that allowed us, enabled us to quickly hit the ground running and kick off this project and get really a lot of data relatively quickly, and then really compete with the biggest labs around the world, which is something that we believe we can do and we are capable of. And this is my last slide. This is the experiment that I was growing inside me, and on the second slide that I showed you a few years later. And I'm sure you all recognize the location. So thank you so much, and I will be happy to take any questions if you have.
Thanks, Natalia. I will take, I have first a question, and then we'll pick up something that appeared way before you started. Maybe you can answer it too. And since you are publishing now a paper, academic publication on the mutation, I tend to get to the conclusion out of that you probably very much anticipated mutations. Is that true? Is that true? Is that true for the general academic community, that they were just waiting for the mutations to come. It's only us who are not in that field that we were hit by a surprise about a month ago with all of these mutations. Is that something that was on your radar screen?
Yeah, so, you know, we've been thinking about it from the beginning, but the truth is that the SARS virus is relatively large virus compared to, you know, influenza or HIV. It is way more genetically stable. So even though we anticipated the mutations, we thought that we might not see as many mutations as we are seeing. So I think that the scientific community expected some mutations, but not as many variants as we got. And I think the reason for that is that just the pandemic, it's exploding. There is so much virus everywhere, and viruses, they undergo evolution. Eventually, if one virus has this improvement in the key area and it enables the virus to infect more cells quickly, so it will just take over the population like that, and it's like everything is on fire. You know, you look on the viral sequences in one area, in one city, and you see you know, thousands of different variants. So it's really exploding right now. I hope that with the vaccines, you know, things will start to cool down a little bit, and then we will not see as many variants as we are seeing now.
It's amazing to see how much life there is in something that is not even a living agent, you know. It's so shocking. I see here questions coming from our audience. One that was at the very beginning, even you start and you may not, I don't know if you can feel comfortable answering, but it has to do with situations, somebody suffering from blood cancer. Do the different vaccinations have different ability to act upon that? Anything that you want to shed light and to help on this? Very important to some people.
Yes, so we're actually now involved in several projects asking questions how people with cancer react to the vaccine, how people with immune deficiency react to the vaccine, how people with you know, inflammatory bowel disease react to the vaccine. These things are still, I don't think anyone knows the answer for that, because, you know, the Pfizer and Moderna clinical trials, they're just involved several tens of thousands of healthy people, and we really don't know what will be the reaction to all the other population who has conditions. So I cannot answer that. I don't know.
I see here a question comes from Brian. Is severely infected people create the strongest antibodies? What is the difference for those people who show no symptoms? So in other words, do we have inclination here and the ability to tell by the way we respond to the different vaccinations?
So different disease severity, you mean?
Yeah.
So I think it has been proven already by several labs, so by our lab and many others, that there is a correlation between disease severity and the quality of the antibody response against the virus. And I can say that many people who had completely asymptomatic disease, asymptomatic infection, they didn't have any symptoms at all. These people usually have less antibodies, and that would mean that they have less response, they're less protected. I don't know, but this is for sure, we see a correlation between the two.
I see. Again, there is very pragmatic questions about the difference between the AstraZeneca and the Pfizer, and to what extent your studies, again, I know you mentioned some, maybe you can shed more light.
Yeah.
What are the insights from that?
So once you know the pandemic hit, there were several companies that started doing the vaccine trials, all basically focusing on the same spike protein, but using different technologies. So both the Moderna and the Pfizer companies, they employ the mRNA for their vaccine. The Oxford vaccine or the AstraZeneca vaccine is a chimp adenoviral vaccine. So it's a replication deficient DNA virus. It's a DNA of the spike delivered to the cells by using a replication incompetent chimp virus. So it's a completely different technology, but it's supposed to do exactly the same. So make our cells produce the spike protein and basically elicit antibody responses against this spike protein. So these are two different technologies, but both of them were proven effective, I think, based on clinical data.
Last question, Natalia, is again, quite timely. People that did have COVID and thank God survived it, will they benefit from the vaccine or not?
Yeah, it's a good question, Ellie. It's a really good question. A lot of people are asking me that question. And my answer is, you know, we can now do these serology tests. And what I would recommend is just to go and test for antibodies. And if you have IgG levels against spike that are high, you have this, you can quantify the antibody response. And if you have enough high antibody titer in your serum, then you don't have to get vaccinated. Because
is there any downside to it? Is there a downside taking that anyway?
There is no downside, no.
No downside?
No.
And is there any downside for me somehow to take here in Israel Pfizer, I go to London, take Moderna, just to cover myself somehow better?
Well, you know, I can't really, I don't really know, but these companies, they don't recommend it, obviously. So they obviously, you know, their protocols, what they tested is that you take dose 1 and 2 of the same vaccine. And I think it makes sense, you know.
Okay. Okay, Natalia, you must be very popular these days. Thank you very much on behalf of all of us. I think we cope with the majority, if not all, from the question from the people. I'm sure they have more. Thank you, Natalia, so much. We will stay with COVID to some degree, but we'll take here a different route as we move now to Professor Miri Scheffer-Mosenson. And Miri is from the head of the Yavet School of Historical Studies. Until 2018, she was the head of the Department of Middle Eastern and African History. So again, talking about interdisciplinary, we're talking about medical, we'll speak about Middle Eastern history here. And indeed, her work is quite versatile in this area. And honest, as Carl and I went through the different topics, it was very difficult to find one because Miri offered the whole spectrum of them. The focus of her research is on medicine and epidemics in the history of the Middle East. And her book, which I believe is based on her PhD studies, but I may be wrong, is Ottoman Medicine, Healing and Medical Institutions during the 16th to the 18th centuries. As I go through her curriculum vitae, I come across terms like plague, quarantines, disabilities. You know, these are hard terms that we need all today to cope with them. She's a recipient of multiple, most prestigious grants, the Israel Science Foundation, the Alon Scholarship, I know very well, it's extremely prestigious one, and the Dan David Prize Scholarship. And the topic today is historical perspective on epidemics in the Middle East. Miri, over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Eli, for this very kind introduction. I'm honored, truly honored to take part in the UK University for a Day event presenting my research that interconnects peoples and epidemics with Middle Eastern realities. And I promise not one word about COVID-19, although what I have to present, I think, is of relevance. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm also not a hypochondriac. I am a historian of the Arabic and Turkish-speaking Middle East. I'm also a citizen of the Middle East, a parent and an educator. That is, I'm not only a scholar of the region at Tel Aviv University. This special position requires me and my colleagues to take very seriously our commitment to excellent research, as well as our role as public intellectuals. My interpretation of what this dual commitment entails is a focus on the great human mosaic of the Middle East. Researching health and well-being in the Middle East is an exceptional venue to uncover exactly that. I start with the question, what did it mean to be physically and mentally well or ill in the Middle East? In understanding what people suffered from and how they coped with these realities, we are able to explain the individual experience, the people whose life stories made out our history and shape our current reality here in the Middle East. Unlike high politics or great power, health is certainly something that everyone, regardless of religion, ethnicity, and social standing, is concerned about. I'm always moved to see the shared human experience that cut across significant boundaries and allow us, in a way, to grasp some of what our ancestors encountered here in the Middle East. My current research looks at how medical safety was debated in the Ottoman Empire. In modern terms, this is the area stretching from Turkey through Lebanon and Syria to Israel and Egypt between the 14th and the 20th centuries. This historical story combines medicine, law, bioethics, quality assurance, and professionalism. I want to share with you the research, not only its preliminary results, but the way it is done. So please step into my lab. There's no white coat. I cannot compete with you, Natalia. I have no fancy equipment. But we historians do have specimens. These are texts and artifacts. We dissect chronicles, literature, and accounts, scientific treatises, paintings, buildings, clothes, music, food, and much more, all enter the historian's lab. I want to present here two court cases in Jerusalem. Until the 19th century, the Qadi court, that is the court of the Muslim judge, was the main urban civil institution in the Middle East. And in order to show you how it looks like, I will share with you momentarily the screen. So these are my specimens, documents written, handwritten in Arabic. These are taken from the registers from the courts in Jerusalem from the Ottoman Empire. I want to present here, as I said, two cases. And we'll see how these two cases, taken from hundreds of such volumes from Ottoman Jerusalem, how they shed light about realities here in the Middle East. The first case I want to present is from the summer of 1579, mere decades after the Ottoman conquest of Jerusalem. The local Muslim community in Jerusalem complaints against a new group of Egyptian Jews in the city. The complaint details many incidents that Muslims saw as violations of Islamic law and Ottoman custom. The grievance is about the economic situation in Jerusalem and the overtaxation of Jews on food and water resources in the city. According to the complaint, Egyptian Jews used the spring pilgrimage to Jewish holy sites, they refer to Passover, as a pretext to enter Jerusalem, when in fact they sought to escape the plague that prevailed in Cairo at the time. The complainants are neither surprised that there is an active plague somewhere in the region, nor are sympathetic to people who flee from it. Their concern is very specific: the negative impact of the presence of the fugitives in Jerusalem. I draw our attention that the case describes a situation that is not an outbreak of an epidemic, at least not in Jerusalem. Rather, it is a vignette of ordinary life in the face of plague as a normative that is regular occurrence. The second case I want to present here is 200 years later. In mid-February 1764, the Qadi, the Muslim judge, was asked to rule on an alleged disappearance of a deposit of silk and soap from the Jaffa port. The litigants are Musa al-Kazemi, a Jew who complained against another Musa, this one an Orthodox Christian, who rents draft animals. The Jew contracted Musa a few years prior to deliver a crate full of silk, hats, and soap to the port of Jaffa. He claimed the cargo never arrived and now demands compensation. Musa, the defendant, on his part, confirmed he was hired for such a task, but argued the delivery was handed over. In his defense, Musa raised three claims, one of them medical. He was sick with the plague and could not deliver the crate himself, so he passed the crate on to his assistant. Musa also supplied eyewitnesses who testified they saw the transaction on the Jaffa wharf. The judge then rejected the claim and forbade Musa al-Kazemi to pursue the matter further. We have no way to establish the real medical situation. Was Musa really sick with the plague? He might have been, because the plague was endemic in the Middle East since the Great Black Death of the 14th century. However, the real medical situation was not just biological. Yes, reconstructing an epidemiological history is important. It is also feasible. In recent years, historians, archaeologists, physical anthropologists, and geneticists join hands to diagnose past epidemics. One of my doctoral students started mere months ago digging in several Ottoman graveyards, and she can already testify that malaria, for instance, was an extremely widespread condition. However, the non-biological aspects of the plague cases presented here are highly noteworthy. Firstly, although the plague was considered a grave medical condition, it was normal to fully recuperate from it. Several years later, we find Musa completely healthy. At least he does not claim otherwise. Secondly, for everyone concerned, a plague is a normal event that does not necessarily require a radical response. Despite an active case of a plague, a pilgrimage took place and a transaction was carried out. In many cases of the plague, civil and commercial life did not stop. Yes, there was a pattern of self-imposed confinement, at least by some social sectors. At the same time, intercity movement and commerce continued. Likewise, interface contacts were more or less intact, although times of crisis such as plagues could set off a wave of intercommunal strife. All these historical conclusions are interesting regarding the past and impact our present and future. History teaches us many lessons. History probably won't yield the clinical solution to an epidemic. Again, Natalia, we cannot compete with you there. But there are other extremely important morals. One is humility and perspective. We don't know everything. We may never know it all. Second, diversity and variety. There may not be an ideal solution, perhaps not just one solution to any given problem. For example, how to encounter an epidemic. And third, epidemics are not random events that harm capriciously. Yes, the biological event is universal, but the structure of a local society and its priorities indicate where an epidemic may break out, in what way it may break out, and how society may endure. All this shows the possible insights from history of medicine in general and history of epidemics in particular. It's trivial to say that epidemics are not a thing of the past, but a global modern phenomenon. epidemics are still the leading causes of mortality in the 21st century. Their history is long and it is ongoing. This makes epidemics the linkage that bridges the gap or the difference between us at the present and the past, and meaningfully connects the past to a better informed future. Thank you very much.
We do know that civilization disappeared because of epidemics, right? At least that was one of the theories, you know, regarding the South American ones, the different ones, and maybe others. So it's quite remarkable, their impact.
Absolutely. But what the current trend of history is looking at now is not just the rise and demise of civilizations because of epidemics, but to show how ordinary life are impacted by epidemics. So we don't necessarily need to look at those peaks of ups and downs, but we can look how people everyday realities, social, financial, cultural realities were impacted for the better and for the worse is due to epidemic. And this is actually one of the highlights I'd like to make. Epidemics impact our lives in so many diverse ways. We tend to associate epidemics with the demise of civilization. But in some cases, epidemics actually open up new opportunities. So
yeah, we are now here together because of the epidemics in these new ways, you know, an expansion and accelerating technology and so on and so forth, things we see all the time. Wonder
exactly.
we talk about that in 200 years, nobody will remember our little epidemic now. Who remember the Spanish flu until a year ago, I guess. You know, again, I mentioned that you are extremely have versatility. Not to be so modest, I would like you to speak also about your course, which is considered one of the top ones in the world, online courses in the world, extremely popular. Tell us a little bit more about what it is.
Okay. I was privileged to be asked by TAU to start an edX, a MOOC course, massive online open course that deals with the history of the pre-modern Middle East. The course looks at the ways that the Middle East transformed from the rise of Islam with the advent of Muhammad as the prophet of Islam till the rise of the big empires of the early 16th centuries. In other words, from tribes to empires. And for me, as a historian, as a professor at Tel Aviv University, to have this immense opportunity to engage with students, learners from all over the world, including from all over the Muslim world. Direct encounter, questions and answers was an immense opportunity, and I was also glad to bring some of it into our classes at Tel Aviv University, so from Tel Aviv to all over the world and back.
Unless there are questions from the audience, I will ask, what drawn you to Turkey, to the Ottomans? Any particular reason? Some on that, and do you speak the language? Do they come to your classes?
Yes, of course. I speak Arabic, Turkish, and Persian. We speak with the people that we study. We don't speak about them, but we speak with them. And this is one of the questions I'm always asked in Turkey by taxi drivers who are wondering about my accent, and they are always puzzled by it. They ask whether my family comes from Turkey. No, they did not come from Turkey. And I am, being a good Jew, I answer their question with a question of my own. Why shouldn't I be interested in Turkey? an important part of the Middle East. And as I said, I consider myself as a citizen of the Middle East. So why not?
Yeah, amazing. Again, the diversity that we can offer of our faculty. You know, we had in the past other speakers from your department, and the variety of topics covered is just immense. And we are very, very privileged to have you here with us today. If there is no particular question, I then will thank you, Miri, very much, and move on to one more variant from pandemic. We are in that motion. Thank you, Miri. Thank you very much. And now moving to the male in the bunch, Professor Colin Price. He's the head of the Environmental Studies Department at the Porter School of the Environment and Earth Sciences. Colin is a world-recognized atmospheric physicist, where he specializes in Earth weather, and the focus is climate change and natural hazards. If you wonder what natural hazards are, think thunderstorms. I picked this as one of his specialties. A most accomplished researcher with over 140 scientific publications. He also has a team of 10 graduate students researching work under him, under his guidance on a variety of scientific research projects. By way of background and education, he got his BSc and MSc degrees in geophysics and atmospheric sciences at Tel Aviv University, and his PhD from Columbia University, parallel to working at the NASA's Goddard Institute of Space Studies in New York. Then he moved to California to the esteemed, renowned Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory there, and before coming back home to Tel Aviv University. And over to you, Colin, please.
Thank you, Eli, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this interesting collection of talks. Very happy to be here today. And I'm going to be speaking about the climate crisis, but in the context of our present crisis for the corona crisis. And basically, there are many things that we've seen in the last year that can help us and teach us about the upcoming future crisis, which is already upon us, related to the climate and global warming. To start off, I'll show you this animation showing the warming of the different countries of the world. And this is the changes in temperature relative to 1951 to 1980, where the size and the color of the circle show us the intensity of the warming or cooling in blue, warming in red, for every year from 1880, I think, onwards. And we can really see from the 1990s, the 2000s, that we're getting more and more oranges and reds until the end of this animation in 2017, where we can see that basically every country in the world is warming. And you can see Israel here on the middle in the left, about 1.1 degree warming relative to the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. This is more than double the warming that we've seen over the 20th century for the whole globe. Some countries like Mongolia, we can see a lot more warming. And so today I'm not going to talk about the topic really of global warming, because I think there's very little debate left. There are still some skeptics and deniers, but more than 95% of the scientists working in this field believe that global warming is real. It's caused primarily by the increase in greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And at least for the last 70 years, we're the main culprit for this global warming. So that's about as much as I'm going to talk about the actual causes of global warming. The rest of the talk, I want to talk about the lessons we've learned from Corona in the last year. I think the first lesson we've learned is to listen to the scientists. I think we heard from Natalia, and we've heard from many other scientists related to Corona. If we go back a year, there were many scientists, doctors, people dealing with pandemics, who warned us that if we don't listen to them, things are going to get out of hand pretty quickly. And we can see the differences from different countries around the globe, those that really listen to the scientists, like Taiwan, New Zealand, other countries where they dealt a lot better with the pandemic than the countries that didn't listen to the scientists. And exactly the same is happening and will happen with the climate crisis. I've been in this field for more than 30 years, and we've been warning the politicians, and there have been reports from the IPCC from the 1990. Every report is showing less and less uncertainty, and we're fairly confident that the science is right. And the scientists are telling us what to do, what we should do to prevent this crisis in the future. The countries which are listening to this, unfortunately, this is a global problem. We have to deal with it on the globe. But if we don't listen to the scientists, we're going to see similar results with the pandemic in countries where the scientists were not listened to. And one of the things the scientists have been telling us about is this compounding exponential growth of the pandemic, of the spread of the virus, of the corona COVID-19. Here we can see data from China in the last a year ago, January 2020, the beginning of the pandemic. And the red dots are the number of actual cases in China over January, and the blue line is a theoretical exponential curve of an equation which has exponential growth. And this basically means that you start out very slowly and things kick in really quickly, and then things explode. You get just too many cases which multiply very quickly from a few individual cases in the beginning of January, and you can see in the middle of January, and by the end of January, within a few weeks, more than 6,000. And this is something we see very clearly all over the world, which has happened, this exponential growth. And for every different wave of the corona crisis, we see this exponential growth. And this can definitely, we can extrapolate this also to climate change. If we look here on this plot, we can see here, it's obviously a very different time scale. But if we go back 100 or so years, we can see the growth of the emissions of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, the main greenhouse gas that we worried about. And the blue line is a theoretical exponential curve, which gives us a growth of 1.65% in emissions every year. This is the R factor that people talk about, the growth. If it's above 1, then we're going to increase the number of people who are getting sick. If it's below 1, we actually have a decrease in the number. And we can see that we're on the way up, just like we were in the beginning of the corona pandemic, and it doesn't seem to be stopping. We've had a little few blips along the way with the oil crisis in the 70s and other protocols, but generally we've got this exponential growth in greenhouse gases. And maybe a few decades ago, we didn't notice it going up so quickly, but things are starting to take off at the moment. Another thing we've learned from the corona crisis is that if we wait to see the impact, then it's normally too late to stop it later on. If we look at the wave of sick people in the UK today, in California, even in Israel, in the hospitals, this growth in the number of people which are infected and sick and in hospitals, if we wait until we see the problem, then it's too late. We get this huge wave of sick people which are overwhelming our medical systems, overwhelming our hospitals. We don't have enough equipment. We have to decide who gets the beds, and it's very difficult to stop it. Well, with climate change, the same story, although different timescales. One example is, for example, the rise in sea level. The predicted rise in global sea level by the end of the century, because of the melting of Greenland, Antarctica, and the glaciers in the mountains, is about 1 meter. 1 meter global sea level rise. If we look at our neighbor to the south in Egypt, the Delta, the Nile Delta, we can see in blue here the regions which will be underwater by the end of the century if we have a 1 meter sea level rise. We're talking about Alexandria, Port Said, huge cities which are going to be underwater. There are 6.1 million people who live in 1 meter of sea level in Egypt. This means we're going to have to relocate them, find new places for them to live. And this will also result in a huge problem of climate refugees. And what we saw in 2015 of the refugees from Europe, from Syria going to Europe, may be just a drop in a bucket compared with what we're likely to see in the future due to climate change. And unfortunately, we're the only stable point in the Middle East, in Israel, and therefore many of these refugees may come knocking on our door on our southern border looking for water and food. So we need to take care of these things and think of them now before it's too late. We can also look at how different countries dealt with the corona crisis. And we can see here, if we look at Singapore, Japan, we don't even have New Zealand on here. This was from days since the 100th case was detected. And we can see countries which took this seriously from the beginning, and they invested in the beginning to shut down and to take care of, and didn't wait to see the damage. They're the ones who fared a lot better than other countries like Italy in the first wave, and even today in Europe and the UK today, and California, and even Israel, which basically were waiting and waiting, and then it was a bit too late. Well, with climate change, again, we have also scenarios going into the future for global warming, and we have different scenarios which we can follow depending on what we decide to do. If we decide to act today and to do things and to change things and to think of moving towards cleaner energy, moving away from fossil fuels, then maybe we'll have a warming of maybe 1 degree, 1.5 degree by the end of the century. If we decide to wait and to see that there really is a problem, then going as business as usual, we may get to 4 degree warming by the end of the century. Now, many of you are saying, well, 4 degrees, that doesn't seem so much. Well, to put it in context, we're talking about a global mean temperature of 4 degrees. If we go back 20,000 years to the last ice age, the global temperatures were only about 4 degrees cooler than they are today. And here you can see the extent of the Scandinavian ice sheet, which covered the majority of the UK, including all of Ireland. This was only 4 degrees cooler on a global scale, and we had most of the UK under ice. That took 20,000 years to change, and now we're talking about a warming in the opposite direction of 4 degrees in less than 100 years. And so if this does occur, we're going to have a dramatically different climate in the UK and around the globe. The next thing we can learn is that we're living in a global village. Everyone needs to understand the costs of their actions in their countries, in their neighborhood, and how they impact the globe. We saw that a year ago, some guy ate some infected food in a fish market in China. Within 2 months, the world was shut down. Everyone was locked down. We couldn't fly, closing down businesses. Due to our connectivity now with the aircraft and flying around the globe, we're living in a global village where one person impacts the other. And if we look at the climate change story, the same thing here. When we've got enhanced emissions from the US, they impact the globe. These gases spread around the globe. When we have deforestation in the Amazon jungle, those changes impact the global climate. The growth of palm oil in Indonesia, which is basically driven by the West's markets for hamburgers, for cosmetics and other things. All of these things which are done locally have a global impact because of this global village we're living in. The next thing we learned from COVID is that really the role of governments is crucial to deal with these crises. We cannot rely on individual companies or the public to take action. Nobody would voluntarily decide to shut down their restaurant for a year or not to fly around the globe, and even to wear a mask. Nobody would put it on unless we'd get a fine when we went outside if we were caught without the mask. And so we see that really governments have a crucial role to try to control these crises, whether it's the corona crisis or the future climate crisis. We're going to have governments are going to have to make decisions about the transformation to a cleaner energy world, to replacing fossil fuels with clean energy, solar, wind, and other types of energy, changing the whole agricultural industry and our food industry, how we eat, how we produce our food, transportation, etc. Governments have a crucial role here in solving the problems of these global crises, whether corona or whether climate change. But the good news is that if we work together as a global partnership, we can find solutions. It's amazing how within less than a year, we managed to find a vaccine for the COVID-19, with scientists working together around the world, governments collaborating. We managed to find the vaccine and to even distribute it to many parts of the population in less than a year. Also the regulation and giving it the okay from the FDA. All of these things were by working together, and exactly the same way, if we work together, we can find the solutions for climate change. We already have many of the technological solutions. Solar energy today is cheaper per unit energy than using fossil fuels. We just need to scale up these technologies. We have to deal with storage when we don't have the sun at nighttime. we need regulation, and most important, we need leadership. But it's possible to do this if we work together. And with all crises, we have opportunities. When we have a crisis, there's huge opportunities available. Today, we may have hundreds of millions of people unemployed around the world, sitting at home waiting to do something. And to restart our global economies after the corona crisis, we have a huge opportunity to stimulate funding, jobs, and investment in low carbon technologies like clean power, battery storage, public transportation, to provide a better future for our world, to provide a better, more resilient future for our children and our grandchildren. And I'll end with a quote which I like from Benjamin Franklin, who stated that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And this is again, from the corona pandemic, it's clear that the countries that were ready and had invested in their health systems and were prepared and had plans did much better economically than other countries that didn't have any plans and also just waited to see if there was really a problem and waited until it was too late. The amount of money which is being invested from different countries to solve the problems now is much more than they would have needed to invest earlier to prevent the problem. And with climate change, it's the same. If we want to transform our economies to clean energy, it's going to cost us money. So we're going to have to put in some money now, but it's going to save us a huge amount of money in another 10, 20 years, instead of dealing with the problems later with heat waves, with fires, with flooding, with rising sea levels, and maybe even additional pandemics because of climate change. We can invest money today to prevent that and save a huge amount of money. From all the economic studies related to climate change, everyone claims that $1 spent now will save $10 in another 10, 20 years. And so, unfortunately, politicians do not like to invest money where you don't see any results. You're preventing a problem, so you don't see the problem. They prefer to wait for the problem and then invest to solve it. So we need to also change our mindset of how we deal with this, but it's fairly clear that we've learned from the corona that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So thank you.
There is a lot of questions from the audience, Colin.
I'm done.
As economist, I cannot stop myself from making a couple of comments. The first one, was as much as I listen to that, you know, let's talk about Israel specifically, a small country. We have so many issues, you know, military matters with our neighbors, political problems, all kind of other issues, immigration, and the attitude has been for a long time, what the heck, what a difference we make in the whole world, you know, whether we recycle our bottles or not. But what we call as economists, externalities. So that has always been a concern. Yeah, we are all good when it comes to moving to, as you said, solar parks and so on and so forth, things that can change the world, but not when it comes to our backyard. I think this is a bit changing now, and I think this is the new generation that takes different, much better view than the parents. I would like also to point out to a major endeavor that I'm very close to, and one of the proponents of that, I don't know if you work with him or not, is Sir Ronald Cohen. All his studies about impact and changing the way private capital works. And I give to the audience only one example, which is the fact that they would like, he now pushes very much the accounting standard boards in the world to put in, exactly as you do financial reporting, also impact. In other words, what are the costs and benefits in terms of the impact of climate of companies? So you can see that, and you may decide to invest or not based on that. So these are major things, and I've seen here a major change in the last 5 years, I would like to say. When I first heard the guy in charge of the pension fund of Japan, $3 trillion that he managed, he said, I don't care about picking up a particular successful fund. All I care is about climate change and these sort of matters, because by the end of the day, that's what will dictate the performance of all the stocks alike. And this is music to my ears and must be to you, Colin. To what extent are you engaged, involved, can add to this?
So there are a number of issues you brought up there. Maybe I'll start with the last one. and that is that at the university, the president of the university, Ariel Porat, is working with us to form a new climate change institute, a climate change action institute, to look for solutions. And these are not only technological solutions, it could be regulation, it could also be economic. And so we're working on developing this, and this will be really cross faculty for the whole university, because we need people from all different aspects to work on this, not to study the basic science of climate change, which I think we've done enough of that, but to find solutions at the moment. So I think things have been done also at the university stage. You mentioned the economic and companies. There's a movement now also on divestment from polluting companies, from oil companies, by many pension funds and universities as well. Cambridge University and Oxford and I think Harvard and others already moving in the direction on divestment from oil companies or any company which is polluting the environment. So there definitely is a move there. Starting out to your initial question about Israel, that I agree with you, we're just a point on the map, and even if we were perfect, we didn't emit any greenhouse gases, it wouldn't have any effect really on global climate, but we can definitely be part of the solution. I should point out that the water industry in Israel is the leading industry in the world. We are way ahead of other countries in the world in recycling of water, in desalination, in drip irrigation. We recycle something like 85% of our sewage in Israel. The next country, I think, is Spain with 26%. And we sell all this technology to the rest of the world. And we think that we can definitely also be Olagoyim. We can also be basically a light to the nations for clean technologies, for climate change, and sell it to the rest of the world to be part of the solution. So definitely, I think while Israel itself won't solve the problems with its emissions, we can definitely help with the technological side to solve the problems. And the impact on Israel, I just wrote an article about national security. For the first time ever in the last year, the military and the defense people in Israel are starting to ask questions about climate change. And it turns out that it's a problem, it's a worry. Personally, I think the biggest national security threat from climate change is not from within, but from without, from our neighbors. And as I mentioned with the rising sea level in Egypt, if we've got 1 million climate refugees, also from Africa, from Jordan, from coming to Israel, we're going to have a big problem. So we really need to deal with this also regionally, but also globally, because it's going to be knocking on our doorstep fairly soon.
Is the new center that you mentioned for climate change action, the fact that it is interdisciplinary, also going to handle the matter of impact on agriculture? Because we have very serious trade-offs. Solar parks take over agricultural land. Agricultural land takes over the Amazon's wild forest. All kind of trade-offs that we kind of become hopeless to how we can handle all these.
Exactly. So our new center will be some kind of think tank to try to solve many of these problems. One of the problems with agriculture, and we have a student working on this, is combining agriculture with solar energy. You can actually have the solar panels above the agriculture, and this actually may benefit some agriculture because they prefer to grow in the shade, not the full sunlight. And so you can use the area for both solar energy and for agriculture. So there are many solutions, but and it definitely takes a multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary group to think of these out-of-the-box solutions for the future.
Okay, we do have time, and I'll see if I can pick up a question here. David raised the point about the population growth of the world. I know the population side, I mean, this is the main factor. I would say that the second factor, in my view, is also the consumption per capita, right? The fact that the emerging market has emerged already. So the consumption there of food is as much as we eat. And, you know,
You're correct. You're correct.
Can we cope with all of that?
Consumption and behavioral issues are also a major factor. When you look at the fashion industry, for example, and now that you can buy everything online through Alibaba, and you have people who are changing their wardrobes every month, all of this requires energy, resources, and that's mainly in the Western world. On the other hand, the Western world, the population is not increasing anymore. In fact, it's maybe decreasing in some countries like Japan, Italy. And the places where the population is increasing is normally in the developing world, like in Africa, in India, where they don't have all the technologies we have today, and they do want to get to the technologies that we have and to have electricity and to have cars. And therefore, we do have it's a big problem. And we need to also leapfrog over the fossil fuels for countries which don't have energy, places in the middle of Africa where they don't have electricity. We can go directly to solar there. But definitely, population growth is a problem, but that's mainly in the developing countries. Behavioral issues is definitely a Western problem, and that can be solved by people changing their habits.
We don't have time to go in detail. I must say there is a lot of attention and interest from the from our audience regarding the matter of food supply. By Guy and Jacqueline talks about here the cost of funding, the land, the change of relative change, the value of land and the pollution control. It's really this interdisciplinary matter, I think, is quite important. I tend to emphasize the economic aspect because this happened to be my field, but I can easily see agriculture coming there as well.
Definitely, and we've just recruited a new faculty member who deals with agriculture and environment. There are many issues related to the food industry, and a lot of it is also supply and demand. The problems with, say, a lot of deforestation in the Amazon jungle are basically to clear area to grow cattle for our hamburgers in the West. And if we reduce the amount of steaks that we have, there'll be less cattle grown in South America and less forests destroyed. And the same is for palm oil in Indonesia or for soya grown also in the tropics. So it's definitely interdisciplinary. But when we talk about agriculture, there are also ideas of moving agriculture into the city so that you have urban agriculture, which reduces transportation. There's an experiment above the Dizengoff Center in Tel Aviv, growing lettuce and greens for all the restaurants within, say, a 2-kilometer radius, and they don't have to have transportation. It's grown in the city. It don't need soil. It's grown in water, aquaponics. And so there are solutions which are being developed, but a lot more work is needed, obviously.
Amazing. Really, a topic of the utmost importance. And again, I'm very happy to see the collaboration coming from all over. And again, from my side, the big funds, there is huge awareness. Of course, people like Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and others definitely are pushing and making a big change in that.
And in the UK also, there's a new fund.
How well we fare in the UK?
So Prince William and David Attenborough just opened up a huge fund, the Earthshot Prize, which they're going to be giving a prize for solutions for dealing with climate change, environmental problems. The UK government has also stated that they want to be net carbon zero by 2050, which, if so, would be a great achievement. The big climate conference, which is going to be held in Glasgow in November, the COP21, is also a major effort to bring countries together to solve these problems. So the UK is actually playing quite a significant role in many different areas.
Colin, this is amazing. Thanks for you and Tel Aviv University for the utmostly important work you do. And
thank you.
Our speaker today is Professor Shaya Vidan. He is the head of the Department of Electrical Engineering Systems at Tel Aviv University. Before I talk about his topic, he got his PhD from the Hebrew University, and then he did his postdoctoral research at Microsoft. So here's somebody who gained a lot of experience from the industry, and that's typical to engineering, of course. So Microsoft research first, and then he was a project leader at Mobileye. I'm sure all of you or most of you heard about this leading machine vision Israeli company. And then research scientist at Mitsubishi Electrical Research Lab. Shai published extensively in the fields of computer vision and computer graphics. It is quite a serendipity that I happen to be sitting here as I'm leading this discussion here at a company, happened to be called Eyesight Technology, which is really a leading one. You can see actually behind me some of the equipment that we have here, some of the beta models. There's more around me. And again, that's exactly our area as well. Israel is leader in artificial intelligence used for machine vision. We happen to be in the automotive industry, truly disruptive space, transforming the car industry. So really, without further ado, Shai, over to you.
Thank you very much, Eli. Thank you everyone for coming and attending. It's a great honor to be here. Let me share my screen and we can start. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the rise of seeing machines and specifically the case of autonomous vehicles. And since I only have 15 minutes, I'm going to cover everything and anything you need to know about artificial intelligence and how it relates to autonomous vehicles. So to get things going, this is an image of probably one of the earliest internal combustion engine vehicles. It's a Mercedes-Benz motor wagon from 1885. As it turns out, the first car accident happened before. The first reported car accident happened in 1869, 20 years before. It happened in Ireland, actually, with a steam car, and the driver was driving recklessly. He took a turn too fast. The woman, Mary Ward, fell off the car, and she was hit by the vehicle, and she died, unfortunately. So even back then, politicians tried to figure out what to do. And in 1865, the UK Parliament enacted the red flag traffic laws. And this law stated that there should be a man waving a red flag, walking at least 60 yards ahead of each vehicle. And if you don't believe me, open Wikipedia and you'll see that this law was enacted in the UK, and there was a similar law enacted in the US. But it didn't hold for a long time. Vehicles became better and faster, and there was no point in using that. But you see that just like epidemics happen every 100 years or so, concerns about vehicles and the challenges they pose happen from the very early days. Okay, so fast forwarding to the 20th and 21st century, this graph shows the number of fatalities for different countries and the drop in fatalities between 1979 and 2002. And you see that in the United States, there are about 40,000 fatalities per year. Great Britain is doing much, much better. Canada and Australia are also shown here. But if you look at the statistics, more than 1 million people die each and every year from car accidents. And I'm not counting all the people that are severely injured by that. So you can think of it as a different type of pandemic, I guess. And the question is, what do you do about it? How can you solve it? And so the solution that is emerging in the last 20 or 30 years is the dream of an autonomous vehicle. And the basic idea is that you start with an image or some sensing device at the bottom left. And through a sequence of steps, engineering steps, you end up with two simple things: an actuator that determines how fast or slow you're going, and a driving wheel that tells you how much to turn left or right. And there are different components to this engineering solution that we're looking for. How do you sense the environment? How do you detect the different objects, the vehicles, the posts, the pedestrians, and so on and so forth? How do you track them over time and know if someone is cutting into your lane? Is it safe to proceed, and so on? Then you need to devise your driving policy. If I need to take the next exit on the highway, I need to plan ahead and not just cut someone 100 yards before the exit point. And eventually I need a control that determines how I should apply the brakes, the gas, or the steering. Okay, so in this talk, I'm going to focus mainly on sensing and detection. And I'm going to leave the rest of the topics for hopefully the next time we meet. Hopefully it will be in person in London. Okay, so sensing. Turns out it's not as simple as you would think. The first question that practitioners and scientists in the field ask themselves is, well, how do you sense the environment? And there was a huge debate, and there are very different sensing devices, and there is a debate to this day. So here's just a small list of alternatives. You can, of course, use radar. And up to 20 years ago, radar was the most prominent device to sense the environment for an autonomous vehicle. But then people thought, well, maybe we can use cameras. You can use a stereo camera, you can use a single camera, but cameras are a good option. And in the last 10 years or so, there is another version called LiDAR, which is a light radar that offers great promise. And so think about it, if you're a scientist or if you're a practitioner and an entrepreneur who wants to build a company in this space, which sensor would you choose? And there are tons and tons of constraints that come into play. The first one is, well, what can you sense with each of these devices? For example, with the radar, you can sense the distance to the other objects, but you will not be able to read signs or the lane marks on the road. With the LiDAR, you might have a very good resolution and a lot of information, but a single LiDAR device like the one shown here costs tens of thousands of dollars. So essentially, you're buying a LiDAR and you get the car for free. And so probably one of the better options today is to use a camera, and that's where computer vision comes into play, okay? So, vision. This is considered the first paper to deal with computer vision. This is a paper from 1966. It's a AI memo from the MIT lab. It's a AI lab at MIT, and it's called the Summer Vision Project. The person here is Seymour Papert, which was one of the greatest scientists of his time, and they had this large goal of building a robot, and Seymour was tasked with the goal of building a vision system. So he had a summer project, he had several summer workers to help him, and he had the entire month of July to develop a vision system. As by the end of the month of July, he had to write a report and suggest some extensions for the month of August to complete the vision research. And 60 years later, we're still working on vision. And so the goal of this talk is to really explain why vision is a challenging problem. And to do that, I'm going to show you a slide and ask you a question. Here is the problem. You have 3 points on the screen. And the question is, which pair of points is closer to each other? This pair of points or this pair of points? Now pause and think about it for a minute. What's the answer? And it's not very intuitive, but when you think about it for a little while, you realize that the top 2 points are closer to each other. And the question, the most important scientific question is, why? Why we say everybody will agree that these 2 points are closer to each other? And the reason we say that is that we all have this common belief in a distance measure, the Euclidean distance measure that we learn in school, that tells us that the top 2 points are closer than the bottom one to any one of the top points, okay? Now this seems trivial. Why would I bother you with that? Well, let's repeat the problem again, this time in the computer vision setting. So what you see here are 3 pictures of Herzl, the 2 pictures at the top, and at the bottom you see a picture of David Ben-Gurion. And now I ask the same question again. Please assign each image to each of the points such that they respect the distance measure. And now, suddenly things are not as obvious as they were before. For example, I can assign this image to this point, this one to this point, and this image to this point. And what I have done essentially is define the distance measure that respects pose, okay? I say that all images of frontal faces, the distance measure between them should be small, and if I have a profile image, it should be mapped to a point far, far away, okay? But I could have chosen a different embedding, as it's called, method. I could have embedded these pictures like so, and this picture over here. So in this embedding, I choose identity over pose. So this is the great problem of computer vision. You have tons of nuisance parameters, and you need to find an embedding that suits your needs. And there are tons and tons of different nuisance parameters that you need to account for. There is illumination changes, and there are object pose changes, and there is clutter, and there are occlusions, and intra-class appearances, and viewpoint changes. And each of these parameters affect your ability to determine what's similar and what's not. What's the distance function that you want to use? Okay? So the whole goal of AI in computer vision is to come up with a good distance measure between images. So all images of vehicles, all images of cars will be mapped to a cluster of points, and all images of motorcycles will be mapped to a different cluster of points, and all images of pedestrians will be mapped to yet another cluster of points. So let's see how a practitioner will approach the problem of developing a vehicle detector for an autonomous vehicle. So you start with a large pool of images. On the left, you see a set of images of cars, and on the right, you see a pool of images of motorcycles. And if you ask yourself why Google and Facebook and Amazon and Intel and each and every other company collects tons of data, this is precisely the reason. They want to collect the data so they can build better artificial intelligence models. So now that I have images of cars and motorcycles, what you do is you embed them as points in your space. So for example, you map this image of motorcycles to this point, and another one here, and so on and so forth. This is a tedious process that consists of training on huge amounts of data, not 6 points and not a two-dimensional problem, but millions and hundreds of millions of images and tens of millions of dimensions of the problem. And so now that you've mapped your cars and motorcycles to this space of points, what you do now is something called supervised learning. What you do now is you train your machine learning algorithm to separate between the red and the blue points. How do you do that? Well, you pick a line. Is this a good line? Well, it's almost good, but not so, because there are red points on the right and all the blue points are on the left, but there are 2 red points that bother us. So we might try a different line. Is this better? No, it gives us the same problem. So we can keep trying, and that's what supervised learning, that's what artificial intelligence does. It learns to find this line that separates the two. It's called the separating hyperplane, and voila. Eventually, it found the line that separates the red from the blue points, okay? And once we found that, we're done. We can equip our vehicle with this artificial intelligence and send it off the road, to the road. And then when we see a new vehicle, what do? 2 simple things. The first thing we do is an embedding. We send this point to the embedding space. Let's say it's embedded over here. And then we ask ourselves, well, what side of the line is it? Is it to the left or is it to the right? If it's to the left, then it's a car. If it's to the right, it's a motorcycle. It's to the left, and therefore we correctly classified it as a car. And that's it. That's the honest to God, top to bottom, the entire pipeline of machine learning. Every time you hear someone doing machine learning, that's all they're doing. They're doing an embedding, and then classification, and finally inference. And this process works if you want to do inference and classify digits. By the way, if you're using Zoom right now, Zoom is doing the same thing. If you have a virtual background, what Zoom is doing is they're having a classifier that telling if there is a face in the image or not, and therefore segmenting or classifying the part of the image that consists of the face versus the background in order to install a virtual background. And once you have that, I pulled from the internet. This is a video that was published several years ago by Mobileye. It shows you behind the screen of the type of data that is collected automatically at inference time from a single camera looking forward on a moving vehicle. This video is sped up just so that we can see more of what's happening. So you see that the algorithm automatically detects all the vehicles, places a bounding box around them, detects the pedestrians, places a bounding box around them, detects the traffic light, places a bounding box around it, measures the distance to the different objects, detects the lane marks on the road, the type of the lane marks, the motorcycles, and so on. And this is the detection part in the pipeline I mentioned earlier. And this stuff goes into the next part of the autonomous vehicle pipeline that I don't have time to describe today, which is the driving policy and the control that determines how the vehicle, the host vehicle, should operate in this scenario. And instead of just looking at bounding boxes, recent advances in autonomous vehicles, this is a video I pulled off the internet that was published by NVIDIA, is doing something similar. What they're doing here, they equip their car with several cameras. And here you see that the system can automatically detect the different types of vehicles, but it can actually do something better. It can label each and every pixel as belonging to a different class of objects. So a pixel can belong to the sky, a building, a pole, a road mark, the road, the pavement, tree, sign symbol, fence, vehicle, pedestrian, bike. Essentially, you convert the raw pixel values into a semantic map. And this semantic map is later processed by the driving policy in the control in order to navigate the vehicle to wherever it needs to go. And there you have it. That's the way people today are building autonomous vehicles using cameras, LiDAR, and radar systems. Here's a question I'm asked a lot by my kids. Are we there yet? So there are 4 frontiers to this problem. There is the technical one, which I covered today. There is the business one, or the economics of the problem. Well, I can build you an autonomous vehicle that costs $1 million. Is it a practical solution? Probably not. There is the regulation issue, of course. What happens when there is an accident? Who is in charge, and how do you share responsibility? And last but not least is the social impact. How is it going to affect the society in general? I recently saw a study that in the US, for example, I think most states, 10% of the population work as drivers. So suddenly you're going to have massive unemployment. What are you going to do about that? What are the solutions? And so on and so forth. So that's it. I hope I've convinced you that we're on the path to having an autonomous vehicle. I conclude with this slide that shows that Israel is a hub for the auto industry. We have many companies working on many, many different aspects of that. Many of my students graduate and go work for these companies. I used to work for one of these companies. And thank you very much. I'll be happy to take any questions you might have.
I would like to ask you, because again, it's something near and dear my heart. A recent article on Qualcomm said, and I quote, "The car becomes an extension of your living room and your office." In other words, I would like to move beyond the exterior of the car to the interior of the car. And the reason is to focus on the value of information that is generated. The equivalence that I see is, Nokia versus Apple. Both of them used to be smartphones or phones. One has developed, and that's because of the information that is there and the economic commercial use of it, and the other one become basically, just selling metal. The feeling is that it's the car of the future. It's all about the value of info. Not all, but a lot is about the value of information. And some tech experts have compared this modern car to a giant smartphone, as I mentioned, on wheels. To what extent you share this view that this is really, really just about to erupt, as we could not anticipate 15 years ago what would happen with the mobile phone?
Yeah, so certainly the information collected by vehicles can be used by multiple parties involved. So municipalities and highway regulators would like to see if there are accidents, if there are congestions, if there are potholes that needs to be fixed, and so on and so forth. And so the information is extremely valuable. You can think of also Orwellian scenarios in which the information is used for surveillance. You can, I think London is a great or not so great example. It's covered by the largest number of cameras per square meter, I think, in the world. So if you walk on the streets of London, then you're imaged, I don't know how many hundreds of times a day. Well, now you have vehicles equipped with cameras, and they also can collect information about your whereabouts. I would like to connect it to the current pandemic. People now find that it's possible to work from home, and they use Zoom, and you can imagine the next generation will be even better, and you'll feel more in person. How much people are going to drive? Some people prefer staying at home and working from home. So it's a great question of how these different trends will collide and end up in the future.
Richard Anton, who used to chair the Tau Trust, coming from being a VC himself, and I'll just read to you from the technical perspective, how much the systems today are capable to handle novel elements of the environment of the vehicle. And he used the example of a football falling onto the road ahead. So that's not something that is typically in the structural way the equipment has been prepared.
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think we're reaching the point where vehicles, autonomous vehicles, from an engineering point of view, are going to be as safe, if not safer, than the human driver. I mean, and then it's a question of educating the public. The public expects zero accidents. I'm not sure that this is possible to guarantee, but for example, when you're having an MRI and you have an autonomous agent checking your MRI and determining if you have a tumor or not, there is a chance of error there as well. So I think something like that will have to be communicated to the public in order for autonomous vehicles to be accepted.
And do you agree that the move towards autonomous cars or shared cars, shared fleets, will totally transform the automotive industry?
Yes, yes. So the sharing comes from the fact that it's a financially viable way to introduce autonomy, because the cost of putting all the computer power in a vehicle is quite high today. And it's better to have it on a vehicle that is moving and earning money in a fleet. Whereas also in a fleet, you can have a proper maintenance over time, so it's useful. If I have my private car, it's stationary 94, 96% of the time. It's not clear that I need
more to the economic drivers for the automotive industry. For example, nobody will buy leather seats or a very sophisticated stereo system if you're going to share a car. So, where would the income come from? And that's a huge change.
So when I was living in the US, I had a Zip car. And when I went skiing, I took a 4x4. And when I went with the family to the mall, I took an SUV. And if I just wanted to enjoy driving, I took a sports car. And so the same thing can apply when you have autonomous vehicle. You have a luxury vehicle, you have some other type of vehicle, and there are many segments to the market.
Fair enough. The fleet also has this consequence of, for example, having insurance premium depends on behavior. Fleets that we see already that the ability to control and to be more responsible regarding the quality of the drivers by the fleet managers. Again, these are, to me, very major changes. And some people refer to that they will compromise our privacy, perhaps. But
so there is an ethical question here, no doubt. I think even today, some insurance companies in Israel ask you to put a black box in your car, and if they can measure, for instance, the G-force, if you accelerate or decelerate abruptly, that's a sign that you're not such a safe driver, and they can charge you premium based on that. I think that's an important question. It's completely outside the realm of technology. It has to do how we as a society want to behave and handle such cases.
Yeah, well, we do know, you know better than me, but there is regulation now in place by NCAP and the European Parliament, as well as in China, that they are really becoming the big brother over us in the cars. It's not a maybe, it's not our choice, it's already there. Again, the percentage of people that die, 97%, I'm told, of people who die in cars is because of human errors. And that's something that on the agenda of everybody.
Yeah, well, now Israel, they want to enact a rule that everyone who enters Israel will have an electric bracelet to track his whereabouts so he will not spread the pandemic. So, you know, people come up with these solutions all the time in different scenarios. What's the difference between this and having you being tracked down in your vehicle or all the data collected on your smartphone?
Absolutely, and people watch what we watch on our PC as well.
Yes.
We just are not aware of that. Last question I have is, again, as you mentioned correctly, your students and others, we see here literally hundreds of Israeli companies in the area of automotive, a lot of them around artificial intelligence. To what extent do you believe there is a chance that Israel will become a major player in that field? We missed out in so many others. In pharmaceutical, we missed out. In computer electronics, we missed out. Is there any chance, without any big market here for automotive, to become yet successful?
Well, I think the world does get flatter as time progresses, and you can build large companies, and you see a lot of startup companies in Israel mature into large companies that have impact far beyond the borders of Israel. So I don't know that we'll actually manufacture the vehicle, but we can certainly be in charge of building the brains of the vehicle of the future.
Brain is what counts, absolutely. Thank you, Shai. You know,
thank you very much.
Very inspirational, and yeah, always good to have the engineering part of the campus well represented here. I really, unless there is something urgent from somebody else to ask anybody here, I'll pass it on back to Kara and finish my part on that wonderful 2 hours. I learned so much. Kara, over to you, please.
Thank you. I'm Kara Case. I'm the Chief Executive of Tau Trust. First of all, Ellie, thank you so much. As David said earlier, we are so grateful to you for leading these conversations today, these fascinating talks, as you've done for many, many years. And now we know, be it in person or on a webinar, you're fantastic, and your involvement is so important to us, so thank you. I'm sure our guests will all agree that the past 2 hours have been really fascinating. The journey these distinguished faculty members have taken us on has given us a true insight into what Tel Aviv University has to offer to its students and the wider community. I would like to thank all of our wonderful speakers for sharing their knowledge. I know it was very hard to do so in 20 minutes, so thank you for doing that for us and joining us today for 2 hours. I know it's a lot of time. I also want to thank my colleagues behind the scenes who worked really hard to put this together, so thank you all. It is events like this that reveal how Tel Aviv University is at the cutting edge of breakthroughs and worldwide issues. With award-winning faculties, celebrated alumni, and transformational research taking place, a lot of which you heard about just now, it would not be the largest university in Israel, nor the 8th in the world for graduates with successful startups without your continued support. Before I bring today's event to a close, I'd like to remind you all of the importance of what we try our hardest to do, to continue to develop the future of Tel Aviv University by supporting the future of our faculties and of course our students. So if you please consider supporting our scholarship campaign, which you may have heard about and you'll hear more about in the coming days on emails and if you check our website, you can influence the future game changers of tomorrow. Information can be found on our website or by contacting us, and our website is www.tautrust.org. And finally, on behalf of everyone at Tel Aviv University, thank you once again for joining us today. I do hope that as when we started out today, and unfortunately Amos got broken up, but David mentioned it and so did Ellie, that we've hosted this event for many years, both at Investec and at Rothschild. And even though this is wonderful in this format, we really love doing it even more in person. So I hope that all of our faculty members that were here today will join us in London in person in the future, and that all of our guests will join us in person as well. And Ellie, thank you again so much. Thank you all for joining us, and stay safe. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thank you.